Growing peppers is one of the most asked about topics at the farm stand and the most played episodes of this podcast. Most of the time, the frustration comes with either not getting bell peppers to grow large enough or other problems for peppers like Sunscald, top-heavy plants, and just generally poor plant growth and low production levels. And of course, there are always the problems with pests and diseases. Today on Just Grow Something, we're tackling all of that and more. If you've had issues getting the most out of your pepper plants, or if you're brand new to the pepper game, this one's for you. Let's dig in. Hey, I'm Karen. I started gardening in a small corner of my suburban backyard, and now 18 years later, I've got a degree in horticulture and operate a 40-acre market farm. I believe there is power in food and that everyone should know how to grow at least a little bit of their own. On this podcast, I share evidence-based techniques to help you plant, grow, harvest, and store all your family's favorites. Consider me your friend in the garden. So, grab your garden journal and a cup of coffee and get ready to just grow something. If you are new here, thank you so much for listening and welcome to our little gardening community. If you are an OG returning this week, I truly appreciate you tuning back in. And if you are one of my junior gardeners listening alongside your adult today, shout out to you guys. I'm told a lot of you listen with the kiddos in the car, and some of them now recognize my voice when I come on. So to my junior gardeners, hey there, thank you for listening. Quick reminder that the question of the month for May is Ask Me Anything. We will be celebrating the 200th episode of this show, the day that I would normally be reviewing your answers to the question of the month. So I thought it would be fun for you guys to do the asking this time, and I will do the answering. Send me an email or reply to the weekly newsletter. Send me a DM, answer right there in Spotify, or jump in this Facebook group. You have until May 31st to get me your question. And don't forget, there are some fun spring and summer designs over in the shop at justgrowsomethingpodcast.com. And those designs are on some tanks and some teas and some travel cups and all kinds of other fun stuff. It's a cool way to support the show and show off your love of gardening at the same time. I am ever so grateful for those of you who have done a little shopping here recently. If you're out in the garden or out and about sporting one of my designs, I would love to see it. So tag me on social so I can see. So I will link to the replay of the original full episode on peppers that I did back in season 2. I replayed it this past December with a little bit of an audio fix to make it easier on the ears. So that will be linked in the episode description in whatever podcast player you are currently in, or in the show notes on my website at justgrowsomethingpodcast.com. That episode was a deep dive into all things pepper, the ethnobotany and the nutrition facts and how to harvest and store and all that kinds of fun stuff. Today, we're going to look specifically at what common problems gardeners face when growing peppers and how to prevent or mitigate them. So the first thing to understand is that peppers are in the Solanaceae family. They are one of the nightshades right alongside eggplant, tomatoes, and potatoes. Now, to me, eggplant and peppers have more of a similar growing style or growth habit, and tomatoes and potatoes kind of seem to be in their own little category. Peppers are a tropical perennial. They were native to the Caribbean, South America, and the really southernmost parts of North America. These are all very, very warm climates. It cannot survive a frost, which is why it's usually grown as an annual vegetable. And if you live somewhere that doesn't get winter frosts, it can actually survive several seasons and just continue to grow into a large sort of shrub. This is also how you can overwinter them in containers. You can bring them inside to achieve the same effect. But this sort of origin story of being a tropical perennial explains a lot about the very first problems that we have with growing peppers in other than tropical regions. Gardeners in climates that have limited warm weather growing days are often in a rush to get their plants into the ground. But peppers absolutely object to this. Planting them too early can stunt their growth, and that is the first problem that we might see, this sort of failure to thrive. So if you're starting your own pepper seed indoors, they like the seed starting mix to be at about 85 degrees Fahrenheit or 29.4 Celsius. That is really warm for seed starting. And even at that temperature, they can take a while to germinate, like up to 10 days, and even longer if the soil temperature is cooler than they like. And they will take a while to really take off once they do sprout. This is one of the first stumbling blocks that you might face when you're trying to grow peppers. Hot peppers are even slower to germinate than sweet peppers too, for whatever reason. And I've had those take as long as 3 weeks to germinate, even in those really warm soil temperatures. They're definitely an exercise in patience, for sure. Peppers will generally not germinate at all in soil temperatures that are below 55 Fahrenheit or 12.8 Celsius. So that gives us an idea of how picky they might be about the soil temperature outside once it's finally time to get them transplanted out into the ground. So whether you have sprouted them yourself or if you've brought them home from the nursery, the air temperature outside when transplanting ideally should be staying between 65 and 75 Fahrenheit or 18 to 24 Celsius during the day before you even think about transplanting. The overnight air temperature should be staying above 55 Fahrenheit or 12.8 Celsius consistently. And then the average soil temperature should be at least 65 degrees Fahrenheit or 18 Celsius before you put your peppers out into the garden. This is likely going to be about 3 weeks or so after your average last frost date, depending on where you're gardening. Peppers are actually almost the last warm season crop that I put out into the gardens. The only two things that are planted later are sweet potatoes and okra. And that's because I'm waiting for the soil temperatures to warm up and the air temperatures to settle. So don't be in a rush to transplant your peppers outside. Cold temperatures can weaken those plants right at the beginning, and they may never fully recover. This is one reason for stunted growth and low production in peppers. The weather should be very warm and settled before you put them outside, so make them one of the last ones on your list. Now, another thing that can cause stunted or slow-growing plants is a lack of organic matter in the soil. Peppers thrive in soil that is slightly acidic and well-draining, and that organic matter absolutely helps with the drainage. It also provides a slow-release version of nutrients as that organic matter breaks down. We also want our pepper plants to have the most amount of sunlight of almost any of the plants in the garden. Yes, they are a full sun plant. And like we talked about last week, full sun is 6 to 8 hours per day. But of any of the plants I grow, I will say that peppers are the most likely to appreciate more than that if you can give it to them. 8 to 10 hours is preferred in my garden in the Midwest because the strength of the sun is just not the same here as it would be somewhere closer to those tropical climates that are closer to the equator. Which means if you garden even further north than I do in the Northern Hemisphere, your peppers may prefer closer to 12 hours per day. Now, can they grow in 4 to 6 hours of daylight? Yes. But will they be leggy and will they produce fewer, smaller peppers? Also, yes. So give your peppers the most amount of light that you can. Now, if you are one of my gardeners that has a very short growing season, you may want to opt for smaller varieties of peppers that mature more quickly than those huge bell peppers or capsicums. There are lots of varieties to choose from that may work out better for you. If you can get your plants to a bigger size by starting them earlier and then transplanting when they're already getting pretty mature, then this is going to help you even more. Of all of the things that I start and transplant, the one that I don't mind putting out when they're larger than ideal is pepper plants. They tend to handle the transplant really well, even at a larger stage of growth. So that will allow a short season gardener more time to get to a full harvest. So choose smaller varieties and then let your plants get a little bit further on in maturity before you actually transplant them outside. Now, another problem is either having too much foliage on the plant or not enough. So in most instances, this comes down to your nutrients. If you do a soil test beforehand, you will know whether or not any of your primary nutrients are depleted. Peppers need nitrogen early on for leafy growth, but once that canopy is created, they rely mainly on phosphorus and potassium for the root development, flowering, and fruiting, and then calcium and magnesium for solid fruit walls and nutrient mobility. In fact, many of the problems we might face in peppers has to do with nutrient imbalances, but not always with a lack of nutrient availability. So let's go through each of these nutrients one by one and talk about what peppers need from each of them and what can happen if they don't have it or if they have too much. First up, nitrogen. Nitrogen is a vital component in chlorophyll, which is what makes plants green and helps them to produce energy by photosynthesis. Pepper plants need nitrogen early in the season to produce green growth. This means early nitrogen use helps give us plenty of foliage that supports the fruit development and strong stems to hold that fruit up. But too much nitrogen later on can actually delay flower and fruit production, which is going to reduce the number of peppers you get from the plant. Next up, phosphorus. Phosphorus plays a crucial role in root development, pollination, and seed formation. When phosphorus levels are low, peppers will develop weak root systems, which means they won't be able to effectively take up water or nutrients. Phosphorus also directly affects bloom quality and fruit production. The last of the big three is potassium. Potassium is also vital during flowering and fruit development by supporting nutrient transport. Potassium aids in the transport of sugars and other essential nutrients and energy from the roots to the leaves and the fruits. Potassium is also responsible for the thickness of cell walls and overall plant immunity, which gives us a stronger plant structure and helps the plant better withstand disease. Now, there are plenty of micronutrients that come into play with any plant's health, and peppers are no exception. Now, while all of them are needed in some form or another, the two main supporting micronutrients for peppers are calcium and magnesium. Calcium is important for strong cell walls in both the plant and the fruits, and so it's very important for fruit development and nutrient uptake. Two common signs of a calcium deficiency in the plant include leaf curl and blossom end rot. Now, this does not necessarily mean that the soil is deficient of calcium, only that the plant can't take up the calcium that's available or that it isn't getting where it needs to go in the plant. The plant needs a relatively low amount of calcium to perform these functions, and most soils aren't lacking that calcium. However, inconsistent moisture affects how well calcium can move through the soil and how it moves through the plant. Calcium is not a mobile nutrient. It can only move up in the plant and it cannot be moved into new tissue. This affects the fruits the most, and this is when we see the blossom end rot starting. So if you see blossom end rot in peppers, evaluate your watering situation to be sure it's consistent. Remember, less frequent, more thorough waterings are best. We also don't want the plants waterlogged, which is why that organic matter in the soil is so important. The other micronutrient that's very important in peppers is magnesium. Magnesium is super important for photosynthesis because it is a central component of chlorophyll. If photosynthesis is reduced, then we end up with stunted plants. The other role magnesium plays is in the uptake of phosphorus, which is why you will see people talk about what a magical thing it is to water your plants with Epsom salts, which is magnesium sulfate. So if magnesium increases the intake of phosphorus and it boosts production of chlorophyll, then if we give them Epsom salts, it's going to give a healthy green color to the plant leaves and it's going to encourage that absorption of CO2. And a lack of magnesium can contribute to just a sort of anemic appearance in your plants. So if you correct that, the plants are going to look much healthier. But there's a catch. An overabundance of magnesium can actually harm your soil and hinder your plants. Too much magnesium actually hinders calcium uptake. So there's this delicate balance with the magnesium and the calcium because they actually compete with each other for uptake in the plant. And if there's too much magnesium, it wins and you end up with a lack of calcium. Most soils aren't lacking in magnesium, but if your plants seem like they need a boost in this area, then use the Epsom salts as a foliar spray, not a drench, a foliar spray to help give them a boost, but just don't overdo it. If you're looking to create timeless beauty in your garden, there's no better way than to add roses. Heirloom Roses knows that the best roses start with the best roots, which is why they only hand propagate own root roses. Roses from the big box stores are grafted onto different rootstock, which is why I think I've never had much luck with roses. These own root roses will outlive and outshine those others, resulting in stronger disease resistance, a longer lifespan, and stunning blooms that are always true to variety. Located in Oregon, Heirloom Roses is a family-owned business that grows over 900 varieties of roses for gardening zones 3 through 11. Yes, 900 varieties. You can use their great search tool to narrow down your choice based on zone, fragrance, growth habit, color, and more. That's how I found my new favorite, the Julio Iglesias rose. Plus, they have a 1-year guarantee, so if your rose doesn't thrive in its first year, they will replace it for free. As a special offer for my listeners, Heirloom Roses is offering 20% off all roses with code JUSTGROW now through October 31st, 2024. And since they ship year-round, you can shop now and choose the perfect ship date for your gardening zone. It's time to experience growing roses the way nature intended, on their own roots. Take 20% off your roses with code JUSTGROW at heirloomroses.com. So besides stunted growth, nutrient deficiencies, and blossom end rot, what other issues can we encounter in peppers? You might find yourself frustrated that either you're not getting very many blooms or those blooms aren't producing fruit. If it's really a lack of blooms, that's usually an indication of too much nitrogen or not enough phosphorus. So do a soil test. But if there are plenty of blooms and not many fruit developing, there can be a few causes to this. The first is improper pollination. Now, peppers aren't super fussy about pollination, and they can often be pollinated without the help of insects because they have perfect flowers. Botanically, what that means is they have both female and male parts on the same flower. So even a light breeze blowing is enough to get them pollinated. But if the humidity has been really high, not only does that reduce pollinator activity, it also makes the pollen sticky and heavy. And if there hasn't been much in the way of a breeze, your flowers may not get pollinated. All it takes is for you to go along your plants and just give them a little zhuzh when the flowers are opened, and that can often resolve this problem. The other reason for a lack of fruit set is the temperature. If temperatures are too hot or too cold, especially in the overnights, peppers can be very temperamental when it comes to setting their fruit. Nighttime temperatures below 60 Fahrenheit or above 75 Fahrenheit can reduce fruit set. So it may be that you'll just need to have a little patience when waiting for your peppers. This is one of the reasons I generally have a huge flush of peppers as we move into the fall. In fact, I joke all the time that peppers here are more of a fall crop than anything else, and I think our overnight temperatures are why. Another really common complaint with growing peppers is why people's peppers don't turn red or orange or yellow like they're expecting to. So if you've grown bell peppers or those little tiny snacker peppers or even your hotter chili peppers, you know that they generally will start out green in most instances. And then depending on the variety, they may turn one of these fun colors when they finally get to finish their ripening process. But a lot of the time we'll see that they're just sitting there green on the vine, and we've sort of checked the maturity date to make sure that, yeah, we've waited long enough and they still aren't turning colors. So what do? First thing, check to make sure that it is the right variety. Make sure that it is something that you planted that is supposed to turn colors, because oftentimes there are bell peppers that are just specifically green bell peppers and they won't ever turn colors. They'll just rot on the vine if you leave them there for too long. The other thing to do is check and make sure that you are not harvesting these peppers too early. It typically takes a minimum of about 10 days up to 2, maybe even 3 weeks for peppers to go from being fully mature green to being fully colored. And that always depends on the variety. So when you're planting these guys, make sure that you're saving the tag or make sure you're saving the seed packet, because it will usually tell you something like, 60 days to green, 80 days to red. So keep that in with your garden planner, your garden journal, so that you have something to reference to make sure that you're not picking them too early, and they're not getting a chance to get to that maturity level. Make sure also that you are providing the plants with adequate nutrients. Low nutrients is going to mean slower maturity rates and a longer time to get them colored up. And then finally, we have to think about the temperature. So peppers prefer temperatures between 70 and 85 Fahrenheit or 21 to 29 Celsius for ripening. Temperatures like in the overnights that drop below 55 are definitely going to slow down that process. It actually could damage the plants if it gets below 50 Fahrenheit. And then temperatures that are consistently below 70 Fahrenheit, either daytime or nighttime, can slow them down too. And then there's also the possibility that it is too hot. Yes, these plants like the heat, but if it's too hot, like above 90 Fahrenheit, this also slows down the metabolic processes in the plants. And so that can delay ripening because the plant is focused on survival at that point and not reproduction, which is essentially what that fruit is. So if it's in the middle of the summer or the height of the summer and it's just getting too hot outside, we see this happen with our tomatoes. They won't ripen. They stay green on the vine. The same thing can happen with our peppers. So at that point, it very well may just be a matter of patience to wait for those temperatures to sort of settle. Again, this is why I oftentimes will say that around here, peppers are more of a fall crop. That is when we get a boatload of our peppers. Now, you can ripen mature bell peppers and even some of the smaller peppers too indoors. If you are sure that the pepper that's on the vine is fully mature, meaning it's as big and as green as it's going to get, and you're just waiting on it to ripen to whatever color you expect it to be, then go ahead and pick it and bring it inside. Now, in order for these peppers to ripen indoors, they're definitely going to need some high humidity and they need that warmth. So in very humid climates, like here in West Central Missouri, it's just humid all the time in the summertime. You can actually just place them on a sunny windowsill where the temperature stays around 70 to 85 to get them to color up in about a week or so, maybe sometimes 2 weeks. You just want to keep a very close eye on them to make sure that they don't start to wrinkle up. The other option is to put them into a paper bag in a warm area. Just leave the end open for air circulation. We don't want them getting moldy. Or if you've got a lot of peppers, you could also do this in a cardboard box. Just space them separately from each other on top of sheets of newspaper and then put that box out of direct sunlight and leave it open for the air circulation and just check on them. Again, this could take, a week, 2 weeks, sometimes 3 weeks, depending on what it is that you're growing. But high humidity is definitely the key with this to keep them from getting all wrinkly. And then the airflow is important to keep them from getting moldy. So worst case scenario, if they really just aren't ripening for you and coloring up, make sure that you're picking fully mature green peppers, but then bring them inside and try to see if you get them to ripen up that way. Now, one of the reasons to take them off of the vine to ripen them indoors may be because of another complaint that pepper growers have, and that's sunscald. So if you're leaving them on the vine waiting for them to ripen, you are obviously exposing them to more sun. And if your plants don't have enough leaf cover on them, then this can cause those peppers to burn, and they get a nasty soft spot that starts to rot, and then that spreads, and then you've lost the entire fruit. So if you see sunscald starting on your plants, and it's usually kind of obvious, it is just this pale spot on the side of the fruit that looks completely different from everything else. It might even start to get a little bit wrinkly. You want to remove the fruit right away, cut that part off, and use it immediately. Now, to prevent sunscald, you got to make sure that the plants are getting the proper nutrients they need from the very beginning in order to grow a proper canopy. So, like we talked about, this involves nitrogen early on. But this is a very delicate balance with peppers because too much nitrogen early on may promote a lot of lush vegetative growth, but that also may result in fewer fruits. Peppers usually respond better to phosphorus fertilizer. So it's something that you kind of have to play with and something that you have to use your experience with. If you know from previous years of growing your peppers that maybe they didn't have a good enough canopy to be able to protect those fruits from sunscald, then you might try adding just a little bit more nitrogen at planting time to make sure that they get that little boost early on and see if that helps you out. Another thing at transplant time that may be important is if you have, plants that have been in their pots for a little while and they haven't gotten super big, but they're already trying to put blooms on just because of the age, you want to pick off those very early blooms at transplant time. I'm not a huge proponent of this if the plant is already looking healthy and fairly lush, but if it's a small plant, and by small, I mean maybe it's only, 4 inches tall, and it only has a handful of leaves on it, and it's already trying to put on a bloom. Normally, this is due to stress. It's probably root bound in its little container at that point, and it's just trying to do what it's supposed to do, which is reproduce before it dies, okay? So if you're transplanting it into a larger area, that is the time when you do want to pick off those very early blooms because we want that plant to focus on 2 things at that point: getting its roots established in the ground and then developing that canopy. The bigger the canopy, the more it's going to be able to feed the plant to be able to give you more blooms and more fruit later on. Again, it's a delicate balance. We don't want too much vegetative growth, so don't go start, dumping a bunch of nitrogen in there because you've got a little plant and you're trying to get it to grow bigger faster. Let it do what it's going to do. Only do those nitrogen fixing activities if you know you're deficient or you've had problems before. But if you're transplanting very small plants and they already have blooms, then I definitely recommend picking them off and allowing them to get established before they try to use their energy for putting out fruit. And that should give you a little bit more of a leaf canopy. Now, the other thing to do with this is to plant those pepper plants closer together. 18 inches is often like the sweet spot when it comes to peppers. And this is through years and years of me following the 24-inch guideline that I have seen places and realizing that they just don't need that amount of room, and they often just prefer to hold hands. They like their canopies touching each other as they get to maturity. And this helps with the sunscald because one plant is oftentimes shading the other one and vice versa. So the fruit that develops underneath that canopy is less likely to be scalded by the sun. This is also super important if you do think that you might have some deficiencies in the nutrient area and that canopy maybe isn't as lush as we want it to be. Then they can also help sort of, again, hold hands together and have their canopies touching so that you're not getting that sun scald. And then finally, let's talk about pests and diseases. The biggest insect pests to peppers tend to be aphids, flea beetles, pepper borers, and pepper maggots. And I know here it's the aphids for sure, mainly because of our humidity, but we also have flea beetles that enjoy making Swiss cheese out of the pepper leaves. So for aphids, a good spray from the hose helps to knock them down. And as long as you're not using any really harsh insecticides, then you usually will have ladybugs and other aphid predators just sort of move in and deal with them before they begin to damage the plants. For flea beetles, try planting some strong-smelling flowers or herbs with your peppers to help deter them, and then use row covers or insect netting when the plants are small to help to exclude them. You'll just have to remove them at flowering time. You can also try dusting the leaves with First Saturday Lime or use a spray that has some kaolin clay in it. And then for borers or the maggots, the borers you kind of have to remove by hand and just destroy the infested plants. If they've been a problem for you in the past, you can spray beneficial nematodes that will attack the borer larvae in the soil, and that will help prevent an infestation. If you've got pepper maggots, there are those yellow sticky traps that you can hang above the plants, and they're going to trap the flies that lay those eggs. And then you can also plant trap crops to lure them away while you cover your, preferred peppers in the early stages. And then as far as diseases, peppers can suffer from cucumber mosaic virus, bacterial leaf spot, powdery mildew, and Phytophthora blight that can weaken or kill your pepper plants. The cucumber mosaic virus, once you've got it, you need to pull out the entire infested plant. If you can control aphids, that's the best way to prevent getting that mosaic virus because the aphids actually spread that virus. For the leaf spot, the powdery mildew, and the blight, these are all fungal foliar diseases. You want to maintain good air circulation around your plants. Avoid that overhead watering because you want to minimize the moisture on the leaves. And then if this has been a problem for you in the past, you can plant disease-resistant pepper varieties. Diseases can definitely decrease our yield or even kill off our plants early. So trying to spot those problems early on and getting a handle on them before they get out of control is really critical in maintaining healthy pepper plants. We are moving into prime planting time here in the Northern Hemisphere. I haven't put any of my peppers out in the ground as of yet. I'm focused right now on tomatoes, squashes, and cucumbers. And like I said, peppers will be one of the last crops to go in. If you start seeing issues with your pepper plants or the flowers or the fruits, I recommend checking your nutrients first, watch for signs of pests and diseases, and then take a look at what the weather has been like recently to see if you can track down the cause before you give up. Once they get going, peppers really can be very prolific, but we have to give them the best conditions we can when we don't live in their native region. Until next time, my gardening friends, keep on cultivating that dream garden, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Just Grow Something podcast. For more information about today's topic and to find all the ways you can get in touch with me or support the show, go to justgrowsomethingpodcast.com. Until next time, my gardening friends, keep learning and keep growing.